The architect of the void, why your isolation is a weapon. They told you being alone was a punishment. They lied. What if the very thing you've been running from, the isolation, the empty rooms, the silence that follows you like a shadow, is not your curse, but your forge? What if loneliness is not a wound to heal, but a weapon you were never taught to wield? Niccolò Machiavelli watched men rise and fall for decades in Renaissance Italy. He studied princes who commanded armies and merchants who built empires. And he noticed something that nobody talks about. The men who held power the longest were not the ones surrounded by allies. They were the ones who understood how to be alone without being destroyed by it. There is a reason society wants you plugged into the hive. There is a reason you are told that isolation is dangerous, that you need community, validation, and belonging. It is because a person who can stand alone cannot be controlled. Today, I am going to show you what Machiavelli, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche understood about solitude. Truths so threatening they have been buried beneath centuries of social conditioning. You will learn why the crowd fears the individual who walks alone. You will understand the strategic architecture of isolation. And by the end, you will see your loneliness not as a deficit, but as an advantage so profound that most people will never be psychologically equipped to access it. But this knowledge comes with a cost. Once you understand what I'm about to reveal, you cannot return to the comfortable lie that connection is always good and solitude is always bad. The two fortresses, strategic versus fearful isolation. In Law 18 of the 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene presents a counterintuitive principle. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous. On the surface, this seems to contradict everything I just said. But look closer. Greene is not warning against solitude. He is warning against fear-based isolation. There is a distinction that separates kings from cowards. Strategic withdrawal versus frightened retreat. The coward's fortress. When a prince builds walls because he fears his enemies, those walls become his coffin. Louis XVI retreated into Versailles while France starved, surrounding himself with sycophants. When the mob finally came, those gilded walls could not save him. The king's laboratory. Consider Marcus Aurelius writing his Meditations alone in a military tent amidst war. Or Machiavelli himself, writing The Prince in Exile, stripped of everything. He wasn't hiding, he was distilling reality into a weapon. The weak man builds a fortress to escape the world. The strong man builds a laboratory to understand it. Ask yourself, which one are you building? The pathologizing of the self-sufficient. You have been conditioned since birth to fear aloneness. Every children's story punishes the loner. The wolf is solitary and therefore evil. The sheep who strays gets eaten. This is not accidental. Societies run on compliance. Economies run on consumption. Both require you to care deeply about what others think. If you are comfortable alone, you stop buying things to impress people. You stop performing for approval. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century German philosopher, saw through this. He wrote that the person who enjoys solitude possesses a self that is sufficient unto itself. Society cannot have that. A self-sufficient individual is an economic liability. So they pathologize you. They call it social anxiety or avoidant personality. They invent clinical labels for a mind that simply does not require the constant stimulation of the herd. I am not dismissing genuine suffering, but I am asking you to question, is your loneliness real pain, or is it manufactured shame? Who profits when you believe being alone is wrong? The birthplace of original thought. Solitude is the birthplace of original thought. Friedrich Nietzsche climbed into the Swiss Alps alone to find ideas that would reshape philosophy. He wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." When you spend time alone, genuinely alone, without the crutch of distraction, your mind stops echoing the opinions of others. You start to hear your own voice. Newton invented calculus while in quarantine. Darwin spent decades alone on his estate developing evolution. Kafka produced haunting literature in the dead of night, alone. The crowd produces nothing original, the crowd consumes. Creation is a solitary act. If you are alone right now, you are the artist before a blank canvas. Will you use it, or mourn the absence of an audience that would only distract you? The physics of neediness. Machiavelli observed that the prince who needs too many allies always fails. When people sense you need them, the power dynamic shifts. They test boundaries because they know you cannot walk away. The ability to be alone is the foundation of every strong connection. When you genuinely do not need someone, you stop negotiating from weakness. Paradoxically, this makes you magnetic. Neediness is a repulsive force. Self-sufficiency is gravity. The 4 stages of transmutation. How do you convert the lead of loneliness into the gold of sovereignty? It requires a process I call transmutation. Acknowledgement. Stop treating solitude as a disease. It is raw material. It is an hour uncontaminated by the projections of others. Excavation. In silence, you encounter the parts of yourself you've avoided, your shadows. Machiavelli knew that a leader who ignores his own weaknesses is doomed. Integration. Accept your darkness. When you acknowledge your capacity for ruthlessness or rage, you gain power over it. You stop being a good person out of weakness and start being a centered person out of strength. Construction. From this foundation, you build your own architecture. This is sovereignty. A sovereign is not one who rules others, but one who rules themselves. The strategic retreat. There is a technique Machiavelli would have endorsed, the strategic retreat. When losing ground socially or professionally, the amateur chases harder. The strategist withdraws. When you withdraw without drama, you reclaim your attention, gain perspective, and trigger a psychological law. People value what becomes scarce. But this only works if the retreat is internal. If you are still checking your phone for their validation, you aren't retreating, you are performing. You must become so absorbed in your own empire that their absence becomes background noise. Why the herd fears you. The crowd hates the individual who walks alone because your solitude is an accusation. Every moment you are content in your own company indicts their desperate social performance. They will call you weird or antisocial to protect their own ego. Ignore them. They are speaking from their terror of the silence, a terror you have already begun to overcome. As Susan Cain documented in Quiet, Western culture has devalued the contemplative in favor of the gregarious. This is propaganda. The crowd produces noise. The individual produces legacy. Conclusion: your interior kingdom. You are not being punished, you are being prepared. The solitude is stripping away the false identities and borrowed opinions. What remains is essential. Machiavelli did not write The Prince to be liked. He wrote it to be true. And that truth outlasted every politician of his era. Your solitude can produce a self so integrated that it does not bend to the wind. That is the gift hiding inside your loneliness. Take it. There are deeper layers to this architecture of power, strategies of self-mastery that would be suppressed by the very systems that profit from your neediness. These truths are not for everyone. If you recognize yourself in these words, you are ready for the next level. To explore what lies beneath the surface, subscribe to Quiet Folds. If you are ready to access the restricted blueprints of the mind, click Join and enter the architect level. Most won't. That is precisely the point. The next time you are alone and the ache rises, ask yourself, is this my sentence or is this my preparation?